Alexander the Great was born in Pella, the capital city of the Kingdom of Macedon, in 356 BCE. His father was King Philip II, a strong and ambitious ruler who had united the Greek city-states under his command. Alexander's mother was Olympias, the daughter of the king of Epirus, another Greek kingdom. Alexander was a bright and curious child. He was tutored by the famous philosopher Aristotle, who taught him about philosophy, literature, science, and the art of war. Alexander was a quick learner, and he excelled in all his studies. He was also a skilled athlete and enjoyed riding horses, hunting, and wrestling. Even as a boy, Alexander showed great courage and ambition. When he was only 13 years old, he tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus, which no one else could ride. This feat impressed his father so much that he gave the horse to Alexander as a gift. Alexander was eager to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. He joined Philip on his military campaigns and quickly learned the art of war. At the age of 18, Alexander led the Macedonian cavalry to victory at the Battle of Chaeronea, which cemented Macedonian dominance over Greece. In 336 BCE, when Alexander was just 20 years old, his father was assassinated. The circumstances of Philip's death are still debated today, but some ancient sources suggest that Olympias may have been involved in the plot. With Philip gone, Alexander quickly moved to secure his own position as king. He had his rivals and enemies executed, including his cousin Amyntas, who had a claim to the throne. Alexander also had to deal with rebellions in Thrace and Illyria, which he quickly put down with his usual ruthlessness and efficiency. Once he had secured his kingdom, Alexander turned his attention to his father's unfinished business, the invasion of Persia. Philip had already begun assembling a large army and fleet for this purpose, and Alexander was determined to see his father's plan through to the end. He wanted to avenge the Persian invasion of Greece a century and a half earlier, and he dreamed of conquering the vast and wealthy Persian Empire for himself. In 334 BCE, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont, the narrow strait that separates Europe from Asia. His force consisted of about 35,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, drawn from Macedon and the allied Greek states. He also had a fleet of about 160 warships to support his operations along the coast. Alexander's army was a formidable fighting force. It was well-trained, well-equipped, and highly motivated. The core of the army was the Macedonian phalanx, a formation of heavily armed infantrymen wielding long spears called sarissas. The phalanx was supported by lighter infantry such as javelin throwers and archers, as well as by the elite companion cavalry, which was Alexander's personal bodyguard and the hammer blow of his army. Alexander's first objective was to secure the Ionian Greek cities along the coast of Asia Minor, which had been under Persian rule for centuries. The Persians sent an army to meet Alexander at the Granicus River, where the two forces clashed in a fierce battle. The Battle of the Granicus River was a resounding victory for Alexander and the Macedonians. Alexander led the companion cavalry in a daring charge across the river, breaking the Persian lines and scattering their army. This victory opened the way for Alexander to advance south into Asia Minor, where he captured the cities of Sardis, Ephesus, and Miletus. The Persian king, Darius III, was alarmed by Alexander's rapid progress. He assembled a massive army, said to have numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and marched north to confront the Macedonian king. The two armies met near the town of Issus in southern Anatolia in 333 BCE. The Battle of Issus was another decisive victory for Alexander. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's army outmaneuvered and outfought the Persians, routing their army and forcing Darius to flee for his life. Alexander captured Darius's family, including his mother, wife, and children, but he treated them with respect and kindness. After Issus, Alexander continued south along the Mediterranean coast, capturing the important cities of Tyre and Gaza. The siege of Tyre, which lasted for 7 months, was one of the most difficult sieges Alexander ever faced. The city was located on an island just off the coast and was heavily fortified. Alexander's engineers built a causeway to the island, allowing his siege engines to bombard the city walls. Eventually, Alexander's forces stormed the city and captured it, massacring thousands of its inhabitants and selling the rest into slavery. From Tyre, Alexander marched east into Mesopotamia, the heartland of the Persian Empire. Darius had assembled another massive army, drawn from all corners of his empire, and was determined to crush Alexander once and for all. The two armies met near the village of Gaugamela in 331 BCE. The Battle of Gaugamela was the largest and most famous battle fought by Alexander the Great. Once again, Alexander's army, though outnumbered, proved superior to the Persians in training, discipline and leadership. Alexander himself led a daring charge into the heart of the Persian lines, almost reaching Darius himself. The Persian king panicked and fled the battlefield, leaving his army to collapse in disarray. Gaugamela marked the end of the Persian Empire. Darius fled eastward, hoping to raise another army, but he was betrayed and murdered by one of his own satraps, or governors. Alexander pursued Darius's killer, Bessus, and had him executed. He considered himself the legitimate heir to the Persian throne and began to adopt Persian customs and dress, much to the dismay of some of his Macedonian followers. With the Persian Empire conquered, Alexander turned his attention to the east. He led his army into Bactria and Sogdiana, which is modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, where he faced fierce resistance from the local tribes. He campaigned in this region for 3 years, fighting many battles and sieges. He eventually married Roxana, the daughter of a Sogdian nobleman, in an attempt to cement his rule over the region. From Central Asia, Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush mountains into India, now modern-day Pakistan. He fought a major battle against the Indian king Porus at the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE. Alexander's army was victorious, but the battle was so costly that Alexander's men refused to go any further east. Disappointed but pragmatic, Alexander agreed to turn back. He had already pushed his army to the limits of its endurance, and he knew that he could not conquer all of India with the forces he had at hand. He divided his forces, sending one part back to Persia by sea and leading the rest overland through the Gedrosian Desert, which is modern-day southern Pakistan and Iran. This march proved to be a disaster, with thousands of Alexander's men dying from thirst, heat and starvation. Alexander finally returned to Babylon, the city he had chosen as the capital of his vast empire, in 323 BCE. He had many plans for the future. He wanted to launch a campaign against the Arabian tribes to the south, and he dreamed of conquering Carthage and the lands around the western Mediterranean. However, his ambitions were cut short. In June of 323 BCE, after a banquet, Alexander fell ill and died a few days later. He was only 32 years old. The cause of his death is still a mystery, but some ancient sources suggest that he was poisoned, perhaps by one of his own generals. Alexander's death sent shockwaves throughout his vast empire. He had left no clear heir, and his generals soon began to quarrel amongst themselves over who would succeed him. Within a few years, Alexander's empire was divided into several smaller kingdoms ruled by his former generals, known as the Diadochi, or successors. These kingdoms fought amongst themselves for centuries, but none of them ever achieved the same level of power and unity that Alexander had achieved in his lifetime. Alexander the Great was one of the most successful military commanders in history. In just 13 years, he conquered most of the known world, from Greece to India. He was a brilliant strategist and tactician, and he was always willing to lead his troops from the front. He was also a charismatic leader who inspired his men to follow him to the ends of the earth. Alexander's conquests had a profound impact on the course of history. He spread Greek language, culture and ideas throughout the lands he conquered, laying the foundation for the Hellenistic civilization, a period of cultural exchange and innovation that lasted for centuries. He also opened up new trade routes between East and West, stimulating economic growth and cultural exchange. Alexander's legacy has been debated for centuries. Some historians view him as a visionary leader who brought peace and prosperity to the world, while others see him as a ruthless conqueror who left a trail of destruction in his wake. Whatever one's view of Alexander, there is no doubt that he was one of the most important figures in world history, whose impact is still felt today.